Michael Renner is on the line with us. He's the senior researcher with the Environment and Society Program of the World Watch Institute, worldwatch.org. And Michael, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much. Glad to be on your show.
Thanks for joining us. Peak meat? Tell me about this.
Well, when we look at what's happening around the world in terms of meat production, we see a very steady growth in the way of production of all kinds of meat. So much so that over the past roughly 50 years or so, we've seen a quadrupling of output. And as you can imagine, that is something that doesn't come easily. It takes a lot of resources, a lot of input in the way of feed, in the way of water input, and so on. And so the question is, how much longer can this expansion continue? Is this something that we need to worry about now, rather than at some point say, oh my goodness, we've sort of reached a peak point, and now we better make do for last.
So the meat is what are the numbers on this?
Well, the overall numbers are, and this is according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, that globally in 2013, last year, production of all kinds of meat was estimated at 308.5 million tons. And, that's, as I said earlier, is up about fourfold from the early 60s, which is the earliest time that the FAO, this UN agency, actually provides comparable data.
Of course, in the early 60s, there were only, when John Kennedy was sworn into office, I think that was the year that we hit our 4th billion people. So there were only 4 billion people on the planet at that time. We hit our 5th billion by 74, I think. 6th billion was 87. So we had just about half as many people, but 1/4 as much meat.
Right. I mean, I think what's certainly happening is, in part, as you rightly say, we have, of course, a larger population on this planet than was the case 50 years ago. No question about that, and that makes a difference. But what I think also makes quite a big difference is that, of course, the dietary choices that have been very prevalent in the United States and in Europe in particular for a long time are now more and more popular in other countries as people become wealthier, as people see, on television and advertising, the kind of lifestyles that we have taken for granted for a long time. So it's spreading, although at the same time, when you look at what kind of meat gets eaten mostly in different countries, it varies a whole lot. So not everybody eats as much beef, for example, as Americans do or as Argentinians do.
Right. I spent a fair amount of time over at nutritionfacts.org, where the good doctor makes a very compelling case that the 15 leading causes of death in the United States, with a singular exception of accidental death, are all reduced by simply going on a vegan diet. No meat, no dairy products, no eggs, and it's pretty compelling. I mean, should we be making an argument that if you want to save the environment, if you want to save the earth, if you want to reduce, water, which is an increasingly precious resource, water use, you can still eat all you want, just don't eat meat and dairy products?
I think that argument can be made, and I'm sure a lot of people will say, "Hold on a second, I enjoy my whatever kind of meat you particularly like. I want to do my barbecue and so on." And I think an argument can be made that by reducing meat consumption to sensible levels, I want to say. Mm-hmm. A lot of the health and environmental gains can still be had. I think what's been happening in generally wealthy countries is that so much gets consumed that we really sort of go from one extreme to the other. There's a problem for many people on this planet who don't get enough to eat generally, and certainly not enough meat if that's what you're going after. But then there are some of us who basically consume too much. So consuming less meat, being a little more judicious about it, also thinking harder about what kind of meat to consume can make quite a difference. You had alluded to briefly the different impacts of different kinds of meat. If you look at beef in particular, it is very water intensive, but also because of the way that livestock, that cattle is being raised and it's being fattened and so on. Mm-hmm. So if we go instead of beef, with of a choice, say, of eating more pork, for example, or chicken, that alone actually reduces the resource consumption that's inherent in all of this.
Is that because we're feeding grains to our beef cattle, and the grains consume enormous amounts of water to grow?
Exactly. That's a very, very large reason. I mean, so much of the world's grain consumption production rather actually ends up as feed for cattle rather than for human consumption. I mean, it's quite mind-boggling.
Yeah. Remarkable stuff. People can learn all about this over at worldwatch.org?
Yes, you can go to the main website that we have. We also have for this, the article I wrote about this topic is part of our Vital Science series, and we have a separate website for that, which you can find at vitalscience.worldwatch.org.
Okay, great. Vital, V-I-T-A-L?
That's right.
Yeah, vitalscience.worldwatch.org. Great. Michael, thank you so much for sharing the story with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me on.
Great talking with you. Worldwatch.org, Michael Runner, the senior researcher, in the Environment and Society Program.